Thank you to everybody for showing up early. Our live webinar will start at the top of the hour, probably about 8 minutes or so. In the meantime, we're going to play you some videos, some short video clips about our Acronis Cyber Foundation, as well as Acronis Cyberthreats Sports. Enjoy. Thank you all for joining early. Our live webinar will start at the top of the hour, probably about 6-7 minutes at this point. Please stand by. We're going to continue to play a few short video clips about Acronis Cyber Foundation and our Acronis Sports partnerships.
ต่างกันหลายอะไรเนาะ
บนโต๊ะคนลิ้นก็เข้าได้ย่ำร่มย่ำนาก็เข้าได้ร้านหมากสายแพทย์ร้านอย่าไปเฮียนดีอกดีใจและชาวบ้านค่ะดีใจหลายบ่ขึ้นบ่ปานว่าสิมีวันนี้
Je m'appelle Ami Diouf, j'habite à Touka.
Saina Boudjob, Babacar Ndiaye.
Je m'appelle Koumba Sen, j'habite à Nguich.
Oupa Sere. C1.
Histoire.
Histoire,
Géographie.
je peux avoir une matière de mathématiques.
Quelle matière au docteur?
Thank you, everybody who joined early. We will kick the conference off in just a few minutes. In the meantime, continue to enjoy some of these videos about Acronis Cyber Foundation and Acronis Cyberthreats Sports.
I'm intrigued to see exactly kind of how hard it actually is.
Get fit in 40 seconds, I don't believe that's actually possible.
Fascinated to have a go, but right now, 40 seconds, it's hard to believe.
I know the science is there, but I haven't experienced it for myself, so I kind of want to call bullshit. So this is essentially my timeline here. 2 20-second sprints, followed by recovery and cool down. That was getting hard.
I'm very much enjoying Carol's chat at the end of that. The first sprint felt different to every other bike I've been on. Exhausted, but incredibly satisfied.
The last 7 seconds was spectacular. You could kind of feel the machine changing with you.
If I was just in the gym, I couldn't push myself that much on my own.
Very impressed so far. That's hard work, very hard work. Still hard to comprehend that you've only done 40 seconds of work. Energised and positive than after a run.
Do you know how originally I called bullshit? I take that back.
Talent, passion, dedication. None of that matters if you don't know the numbers. It's the work you don't see by players who take no applause. True teamwork, proper preparation, all driven by the data.
Can he open the scoring?
To cover every angle. Data is everything. It's how you improve. It's how you get ahead. It's how you stay there. And with Acronis on your side, your data, applications, and systems are safe. You can protect your edge. Acronis Cyber Protection, the complete solution for data backup and cybersecurity for the world's top sports teams and businesses everywhere. Protect your edge.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining. Welcome to the Acronis virtual conference, a new playbook to protect your users from cyber threats in 2021. My name is Pat Hurley. I'm the Vice President and General Manager for the Americas here at Acronis, and I am delighted to be your host today. Before we kick things off and get into the panel session, the demo, and all the cool stuff we got planned for you today, I'd like to share a few housekeeping notes. Number one, this session will be recorded, so we'll be able to share the recording with you after the fact, share it with friends, family, and colleagues. And we will also be able to, sorry, the recording message just kicked off. We will also be keeping track of the Q&A. So you'll see the little logos at the bottom there of the Zoom conference. Feel free to ask your questions. We will be answering throughout. Please mute your microphone. It will be actually muted for you, but please make sure you're submitting your questions through the Q&A interface. Some of those will be answered live by a group of engineers we have on the back end. Some of those will be answered live by our panelists later on in this session. So without further ado, I do want to get into the agenda. We have a terrific lineup of speakers for you featured today. But first off, the first speaker we'd like to put out to you is James Slaby. James is our first speaker. He's the head of cyber protection at Acronis. He also worked as an industry analyst covering cybersecurity, cloud services, and networking at research firms like Forrester and the Yankee Group. With over 300 tech research reports, he's been quoted in The Economist, the Wall Street Journal, hundreds of other tech publications. I've worked with James for a number of years now, and I would like to pass it over to him. Good luck, James.
Thank you so much, Pat. Folks, I've got a bunch of statistics here that I'm going to kind of jam through pretty quickly so we can get to the juicy parts of the event, which is our keynote speaker and particularly the panelists, and them answering the questions that you submit throughout the event. So if I kind of blast through some of this stuff, you can always go back to the recording that we're going to send you a little later if I don't touch on every single stat that I've compiled for you here. Next slide, please. So kind of key points to understand is that while the large enterprises get all the headlines, mid-size and small and medium businesses are equally under attack. Cybercrime has become a kind of a major industry here. And so they're casting a big net. So just because you've only got a few dozen or a few hundred employees, you are still very much a target. And that's how we get to a spike of 300% in attacks over the course of the past year, with 2 out of 3 of you getting hit. Nobody's feeling good about their efficiency in responding to threats. You've read about the SolarWinds breach that recently happened. You know that the bad guys have new ways to reach into your network to cause havoc, create mischief, try to steal your data, try to steal your money. Next, please. Another big trend, of course, is partly accelerated by the events of the past year. A lot more data has moved out to the edge. So it's a lot more vulnerable out there than it was in the good old days when everything was much more centralized. So you've got more data, obviously, in your employees' homes, less protected locations like, say, your factory, or if you're in healthcare, you might have a kind of a neighborhood walk-in healthcare facility, or in retail stores. So kind of outside the classic bubble of cybersecurity that you used to be able to wrap around your data. Of course, nobody's able to keep up with the known vulnerabilities in their operating systems, in their networking gear, and their applications. On average, we spend over 100 days between the time we become aware of a vulnerability and the time we get around to patching it. So in the meantime, the bad guys have a chance to exploit that. Meanwhile, everyone's downtime costs are going up. There's a stat that I don't quote here because it's a couple of years old now, but I'm sure it's more relevant now than ever, which is that if your business is offline for as long as 2 weeks, there's a 93% chance that you'll be out of business in 6 months. So, downtime has really become a kind of an existential threat to your business. Next, please. So ransomware is still the hugest malware threat out there. Obviously, if you follow the tech security press, you know that there's a major attack going on every day. And of course, cyber criminals are getting more ingenious in terms of the ways that they're getting you to pay up. I mentioned that it's industrialized, so the sheer volume is much higher, kind of trending up steadily. That continues into this year. We're looking at late last year's numbers, but kind of a steady uptick in the number of attacks. And plus now they're using tactics like double extortion. So this means before they trigger the encryption attack, they surveil your environment and steal valuable information. Then when they do trigger the attack, your ransom note says, look, you can pay up or not, but if you don't pay up, we're going to start leaking your sensitive data online. A new wrinkle that we saw just in the last couple of months of last year and continues into this year is the use of distributed denial of service attacks. So pay up, and not only will you get your decryption key so that you can get access to your data again, we won't flood your network with traffic that will bring your servers down and bring your business to a grinding halt. There's other tactics that they've been using for a while, like disabling your defenses, encrypting your backups. They're even able to get after Mac OS and iOS devices that we used to think were relatively invulnerable to malware attacks. Next slide, please. I'm not going to go through this slide. If you follow the press, you know that there's some big enterprise that's getting smacked hard with a ransomware attack every other week. If you're a large enterprise, you're typically facing ransom demands in the tens of millions of dollars. Very often, we find out after an attack that the damage to the company in terms of downtime costs, recovery costs, maybe a hit to their stock price, if they're a public company, can run to hundreds of millions of dollars. But even if you're a small company, you are still very much subject to an attack. I look at that University of California, San Diego attack. They basically had hundreds of millions of dollars worth of basic research on their medical school servers that was being locked up. So paying $1 million ransom in that case clearly seemed worth it. But think about the hit that must be to a public university's budget. Speaking of budgets, next, please. This is a recently updated survey data that shows just how little resources most of us have to build our cybersecurity defenses. 39% of small and medium businesses have $1,000 a year allocated to them to fight it, and maybe a few more dollars spread around the organization. But that scant bit of money not being deployed necessarily in the most coordinated, focused kind of way. So my heart really goes out to you if you're one of those businesses that has all of $1,000 to spend to defend your organization for the year against cybersecurity threats. Obviously, that means if you don't get some kind of force multiplier in effect, you're never going to be able to keep up with all the new threats that are out there. Next slide. So this is one of the big problems that we see with kind of the classic legacy tools, old-fashioned backup, old-fashioned antivirus. Signature-based AV just is not capable of fighting the new malware threats. For instance, most malware threats these days are 0 days. There's no signature that will help defend you against them. There's living off the land attacks now where they're injecting the malware directly into memory. So that completely bypasses SIG-based AV. If you've got multiple agents and multiple consoles for all the tools that you're using, that's expensive. There's extra training costs with it. Sometimes the agents conflict with each other, kind of undermine each other's efforts. And you're going to leave seams in your coverage of your defenses when you've got a multiplicity of technologies from different vendors at work there. On the backup side, your backups, again, criminals are targeting the backups so you can't use them to recover, or they're infecting them. If you try to recover from an outage with an infected backup, you're just restoring that malware into your live systems. And of course, none of these things are collecting useful forensic information you can use to kind of figure out what went wrong if you do get attacked and try to cover up those gaps going forward. So next, please. So basically, this leaves us with, these stats are great in terms of helping, explain to your management, look, the threat is real, it's urgent, we've got to do something about it. The question now is, what do you actually do? So I've kind of summed it up in, you've got to understand the limitations of your current legacy cybersecurity attack, this kind of fragmented approach using legacy technologies that really just aren't up to the new threats. You need to figure out why you're being targeted and how they're doing it. And then you've got to adapt to kind of the new realities that we face getting through the pandemic and looking beyond. The fact that the threats are evolving. We have many more employees who have shifted to remote work and are in poorly defended working on home equipment. We've been forced to move to new SaaS applications that maybe we don't understand that well how to protect. The bad guys are using more integrated tools. They're more automated tools, more artificial intelligence enabled tools. If you're not moving to those technologies too, you're falling behind in that battle. Of course, making sure that your own employees and your partners are aware of the things they can do to fight it, not clicking on dubious email attachments or links is just one example. And then thinking about response planning for when an attack inevitably does get through. That's not the domain of the kind of stats that I'm presenting. The good news is that that's exactly the kind of questions that our speaker and our panelists are going to answer throughout the rest of the event. So keep those questions coming. And with that, I'll hand the baton back to you, Pat.
Thank you, James. Very insightful and a lot of interesting data points there. So thanks for sharing that with our attendees. Our next segment of the conference is going to be a keynote. It's going to be driven by Paul Stringfellow. Paul is a data security analyst at GigaOM, who has over 25 years in experience in the IT industry, helping organizations of all sizes use technology to deliver business outcomes. Most of that work is generally focused on helping enterprises to develop and understand strategies to manage their data, and ensure it's protected, secure, compliant, available, all that good stuff. So he works with these companies across SMBs, enterprises, public sector, et cetera. Probably run the gamut there. He's still very much a hands-on practitioner and continues to be involved in a diverse range of data projects. Paul's been recognized across the industry and has spoken at many industry events as a vendor, as a community evangelist, et cetera. Writes a number of industry publications as well. So Paul, hopefully that introduction did you justice, and I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Pat. And yeah, while he was giving that introduction, I did look around to see who he was talking about. So firstly, Pat, thanks for the introduction, and and thank you to the team at Acronis for inviting me to come and share some thoughts with you today. It was a great excuse to put a shirt on. I've probably not worn one of these for a year, so that's nice. Yes, I am from the UK. I'm from England, so I do believe translation services will be available afterwards if you need them. So just give you an idea. For over the next 15 minutes or so, I'm going to share with you some of the things that I've learned from companies who've had security breaches and some of the techniques and strategies that I've been able to advise them with to help reduce and mitigate some of those risks in the future. And actually the things that James talked about, maybe putting a little bit of more detail around some of the stuff that James touched on in kind of that opening segment. So, like most of you, I'm sorry, next slide, please. So probably like most of you, I'm very much a fan of a sporting analogy. So when I was invited along to this event and saw the theme that Acronis were talking about today, this idea of modernizing your playbook, I thought that gave me the perfect excuse to use some sporting pictures. So if we take a look at those sporting success stories that have succeeded in their sports over the last 12 months through 2020 and into 2021, what is the one thing that all of these people have in common? Well, for me, one of the things that they certainly have in common is that all of them, or none of them actually, achieved the success that they had by using an out-of-date playbook. None of them won their events in 2020 and 2021 with 2010, 2011's playbook. All of them had modernized their playbook. All of them had optimized for today's challenges. They were aware of and built strategies and plans to deal with today's opponents and developed the best tools and approaches to achieve the success that they did. And that's the kind of approach that we need to take with cybersecurity next. So why do we need to take that change? And why do we need to modernize our playbook? Well, of course, all of us today are joining this event remotely in some form or another. And I'd like to think that none of you are joining this event by having fired up your latest Samsung Windows phone, got out your compact laptop and fired up your latest copy of Windows 7 to join this event. Certainly I hope none of you have done that. And often with cyber breach, while the thing that I don't see is necessarily lots of people using old technology, what we do tend to see with them is that lots of people are taking old approaches to dealing with today's modern problems, a little bit like James touched on actually earlier on, and they're using this kind of idea of an out-of-date playbook, an out-of-date strategy. And I think in many cases, what I tend to find is that they're fighting today's opponents with yesterday's tools. They're focused on solving the cybersecurity threat that was prevalent 5 years ago, and then wondering why today's modern cyber threats are overtaking them and getting past their cyber defenses. Next slide, please. So why is it that our cybersecurity defenses, our cybersecurity strategies are not relevant in the way they were 4 or 5 years ago? And that's really because a lot of things have changed. If we look at, certainly if I look at my organization, and I'm sure if those attending today, if you look at your own businesses, you'll realize that over the last few years, those businesses have changed greatly. And one of the things that I tend to find with people who've been affected by a cybersecurity breach is that while their businesses have changed, they've not necessarily recognized that, and they've not added to that a change in the way that they look after their cybersecurity, look after their data security. For many of us, our businesses today are increasingly digital. We very much rely on our technology. We rely on it much more today than we did even just a short 5 years ago. And increasingly, we're embracing the idea of cloud, whether that's public cloud or just a cloud way of working, because that idea of public cloud gives us things that most modern businesses desire. And that's that idea of flexibility, almost the idea of any time, any place, pretty much any device access to our key corporate data, our key corporate systems, are things that allow us to interact with our customers and drive business and drive revenue. Data is more critical than ever before. Many of us would have heard the phrase that data is the new gold, but data is core to the modern business. It's our intellectual property. It's a core business asset, is the way I like to talk about it with the organizations that I work with. It's our intellectual property, it's our customers, it's the suppliers, it's our marketing plans, it's our price book. It's a key part of information for us. And while that core business asset is so valuable to us, the desire to be able to secure it and keep it safe is obviously something that's high on the agenda for lots of organizations, or at least should be. But of course, one of the issues that we have with that is in this modern world where we're more distributed and we need to share our data increasingly. So we need to make that data available. We need to be able to use that data amongst our workforce, with our customers, with our partners. And of course, so we're looking to share our data more, but we're also doing that within this ever increasing and ever tightening regulatory landscape where data security and privacy have huge impacts on businesses if they don't deal with and take those kind of issues seriously. Next slide. And of course, so next slide, please. Yeah, so, and of course, a lot of those changes were happening prior to kind of, if we rewind 12 months ago, when suddenly COVID became part of our everyday conversation. And what COVID has done is not necessarily drive different change, but has absolutely accelerated change in businesses of all sorts, whether you're big or a small enterprise. The idea of the changes that we've had to adopt over the last 12 months just to stay in business, just to be able to operate on a day-to-day basis has accelerated massively. Our workforces became hugely distributed overnight. We went from a central office of maybe 50, 100 or 500 people to suddenly 50, 100, 500 different offices with just one person working within them. And no longer did we give all of our staff the kind of the convenience and security that we could give by having them within that head office kind of setup, that data center setup where we had our firewalls and our IT teams in place to protect them. Many of us have moved increasingly to cloud. We've taken new cloud services that we were maybe just experimenting with, just using infrequently previously. Things like Zoom, things like Teams, things like Slack, things like Google Hangouts. Tools that were things that we would use occasionally to maybe do the odd remote meeting. Suddenly, and I know it certainly did in our business, suddenly became something that we relied on day to day just to operate as an organization. And of course, many of our users today are accessing this increasing amount of tools using mobile devices, maybe using their home laptops, and are certainly connecting on non-enterprise infrastructure. So a lot of the enterprise infrastructure security that we would rely on inside of our organizations is just no longer available to us, because most people, are certainly not connecting over the corporate Wi-Fi anymore. They're connecting on their home Wi-Fi and across the internet. And another big change that we've seen over the last 12 months particularly has been a change in our users. Because our users have suddenly become more distributed, many of them find themselves in positions where they're alone, they're feeling unsure, they're much more susceptible to potential cyber attack and cyber threat. And partly because they've been moved massively outside of their comfort zone. Today they can no longer rely on leaning over the desk to talk to a colleague if they're unsure of something, or be able to pick up the phone to the IT guy who can wander across the office and help them out. And that's opened up a huge attack vector for today's cyber criminal. Next slide, please. So while the environment that we operate in has changed, and that change has accelerated massively over the last 12 months, the other thing that has changed, of course, is what does our modern opponent look like? What does today's cyber threat look like? And this is some of the things that James touched on earlier on. What is it what's their playbook look like? What are the tools that they've got to attempt to breach the security defenses that we've put in place to protect our key data assets and our key business assets? So what does our opponent look like? Well, certainly the tools that they have in their armory, as James touched on earlier on, are things like malicious code. The idea of being able to use ransomware to attack our businesses, to make our data and systems unavailable to us. We've seen a huge uptake in phishing attacks for organizations, and looking at people building very smartly crafted, very professional looking, ingenious phishing attacks that are designed wholly to throw our end users off, and for those end users who are already being moved out of the comfort zone, those cyber attackers are looking at ways to shift them even further from that comfort zone into making mistakes. And why are phishing attacks growing in prevalence? Because one of the huge attack vectors that we're seeing today in modern organizations, and much more than we have done in the past, is identity theft. The idea of being able to steal an appropriate identity to get access to somebody's organization is a key tactic for the modern cyber criminal. And why would they do that? Well, maybe launching malicious code across somebody's network or into somebody's system is ultimately a goal for the cyber attacker, that's still a pretty difficult thing to do, to get past the defenses that we have in place. But that's a much easier job if they've got an appropriate identity, particularly an identity that maybe has a level of privileged access. And one other area that we see is increasingly a challenge for organizations is the insider threat. Now, I think in many cases, we don't often see those threats that are already on our network. I talk a lot to organizations about this assume breach position, assume that you've already got bad actors on the inside of your network. And that insider threat can be everything from a disgruntled employee to perhaps just that employee who's about to move on to pastures new, is about to get a brand new role, and he feels it's, or she feels it's right, absolutely within their rights to take with them their customer contacts, information about your price book, your latest marketing tools, and they just think that's okay for them to take to help them in their new job. But bear in mind, that's your business data asset. And all of these challenges, as I mentioned before, sit within this increasing regulatory framework, a framework with ever tightening regulation and focus on us as businesses to maintain data security and data privacy. And the impact of not doing so has the potential to be huge on any organization, whether that organization is big or whether that organization is small. Next slide, please. And what is the ultimate aim of our cyber criminal? What is the thing that they're really after? Ultimately, their goal is our data. Now, I've touched on this a couple of times, and in Pat's introduction, he mentioned that I focus and specialize in data security. And that's because of the organizations that we deal with today. Data is a major asset to their business. And the goal of the bad actors is either to steal it from us by exfiltrating it out of our organization, or to stop us accessing it by something like a ransomware attack, where we can no longer access our data, up to the point where you're prepared to pay them money to get your data back. And when we see this achieved in businesses big and small, the impact can be significant. The impact can go from a disruption of just hours to weeks and months. The impact can be huge in terms of cost, not just in terms of lost productivity, but also in terms of fines if we've had some kind of regulatory breach. And reputational damage, this is a huge area that we see for organizations, because once you've had a cybersecurity breach, your customers may find out, and certainly if your competition are finding out, they're making sure your customers get to know about it. And in the absolute worst cases, the thing that we've seen is that companies have completely failed to recover from a cybersecurity incident. It has closed the doors of their business, and that's in absolutely the worst cases. So next slide, please. So while we've talked about what our cybersecurity threat looks like, what the bad actor looks like, what our modern opponent looks like, and some of the reasons we've needed to change, how do we start to move forward with this? What are some of the things that we need to do to modernize our playbook? So for me, there's 4 areas of focus when I talk to organizations about building a cybersecurity strategy fit for 2021 and beyond. And I think one of the first things that we look at, one of the things that organizations are often slow to realize you are a target. In fact, I talked about this before, but assume you're already breached. Because I talk to many organizations that think that their organization's not significant enough for them to be attacked or be a target. And a bad actor may not be targeting you specifically. They don't have to. Bad actors are trying to attack millions of companies at the same time, and they only need organizations, 1 or 2 organizations in that attack plan that they've got, to click on a wrong link or allow the wrong kind of access or share the wrong kind of information for it to be financially viable for them to continue. The next thing is to get the basics right. Do the basic things inside of your organization. Make sure you've got a good baseline security posture. Do things like, have I got good password hygiene? Am I making sure we're regularly changing passwords? Have I got access controls in place? Am I putting multi-factors of authentication in place? Am I controlling what users can and can't do? Am I patching systems? Am I making sure my systems are up to date? Often we'll see a cyber incident being caused by a patch that a vendor had fixed 12 months previously. And am I doing things like, if I've invested in antivirus and malware tools, am I making sure those tools are up to date? Am I continuing to pay the subscription that somebody like Acronis is ringing you up every 12 months to say, it's about time you renewed your subscription? There's no point having those tools if we're not keeping them up to date. And I think another big area that organizations miss is the idea of education. Education and cybersecurity, building a cybersecurity culture is absolutely core to building a successful playbook for dealing with the modern cybersecurity threat. Now, one of the things that I always find frustrating when I talk to an organization is very much that their focus is on how all of their staff are their problem when it comes to cybersecurity. We need to turn that thinking around and make sure that our staff are our biggest asset when it comes to fighting cybersecurity. But we can't assume that they know what the modern cybersecurity threat looks like. We need to be able to take time and educate them how to spot a phishing attack and how to spot a potential cyber attack. And I think it's important that we embrace cybersecurity discussions, that we make sure that everybody feels comfortable talking about cybersecurity in your organization. And if they're unsure, there's a culture there of being able to ask and not be afraid that they're going to be pointed at and made to feel silly for asking a question. And make data at the core of your thinking. This again is a subtle change, but is an important one. Traditionally, our cybersecurity approaches have been based around looking from infrastructure upwards. Well, today we need to make sure that we look from data down and secure our data, because we do need to be able to share it, but we need to think about how we do that securely and while we maintain control. And don't be afraid to invest in your cybersecurity stack. Too often I will see that organizations have failed to invest. Cybersecurity gets pushed right down the priority list, and the only reason they realize they pushed it down the priority list and failed to invest properly is when it's too late. Next slide, please. So let's wrap up with how we improve our modern cybersecurity stack. James touched on this before. We can't rely today on a security stack that looks at static information. It is based on relying on block lists or relying on database signatures. We can't rely just on thinking about our perimeter security. Ask yourself the question actually in your business today, where is the perimeter? Is it your head office? Is it somebody's home office? Is it somebody's smartphone device? And please don't assume that everything will just be okay, that you're never going to get attacked by some sign of cybersecurity breach. And so what do we need in our stack? Well, firstly, we need intelligent systems. We need systems today that can understand what our baseline security looks like and what is normal behavior inside of our networks and across our infrastructure, and be able to react when it sees things that aren't usual behavior. We need automation. The cybersecurity risk is big and difficult and ever evolving. So increasingly, we need tools that not only can see changes that may be a threat, but where appropriate, automate the response to mitigate that risk. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Cybersecurity is a complex and big challenge. So look at the people who are around you who may be able to help. Think about trusted IT advisors that you already speak to. Think about the online community. Look for people who do cybersecurity on Twitter, on LinkedIn. Visit places like Reddit where there's good cybersecurity discussions. Appreciate that the cybersecurity industry is big and helpful if you're prepared to go out and ask for a little bit of support. And don't think that you have to do this yourself. Increasingly there's a really strong core of security service providers that are available to you. And of course, they will take away lots of that cybersecurity problem for you. They will look at the threats and they will look to quickly mitigate them for you. And of course, they will want paying for that. But again, if that's the right model for your business, don't be afraid to investigate it. And finally, don't be afraid to talk to vendors. It's great to see so many of you at this event with Acronis today. And of course, Acronis want you to buy their security tools, but also you'll get the opportunity, as we will later, and as you just heard from James, to hear from experts in the field who can share some of their experiences with you. Final slide, please. So hopefully you found what I've been able to share in the last 15 minutes with you helpful, and you'll be able to take some things away from today's event and take them to your own business and maybe ask some questions about how modern your playbook is and is it helping you to deal with the modern cybersecurity threat. And of course, while we can't all be together in person, I think it's important that we can try and keep that conversation running and keep it going after the event. So I've shared some of my contact details there. If you want to kind of reach out to me on social media, there's lots of places that you can find me there. Now, I'd just finally like to point you to a little bit of research that one of my friends, John Collins over at GigaOM did this in association with Microsoft, where they went out and talked to around 400 different businesses, your peer group, to ask them what they thought today's modern cybersecurity threat was and what they were doing about it. It's an interesting report. It's freely available on GigaOM's website. The link's on screen. It's probably worth a half an hour of your time to take a read. So for now, I'd like to hand back to Pat, and I'll be back a little bit later chatting with our panel.
Thank you, Paul. Great stuff there. We're going to pop up a quick survey now. In the meantime, please continue to submit your questions. Those will either be answered live by one of our solution engineers in the back end, or they'll be answered live by our panelists in a few minutes after we get through a few different items. So if you don't mind, go ahead and pop up that survey. Essentially, what is your direct experience of ransomware attacks? Either you haven't had any evidence of an attack, or you've had evidence of an unsuccessful attack. Maybe an attack began, but you contained it. Maybe an attack succeeded and you're recovering from it, but you didn't have to pay. Or maybe an attack succeeded and then you had to pay on top of that to recover. Should be some interesting answers there. All right. So as we allow somebody to answer that panel question real quickly, we're gonna kick over to the live panel, where we'll have some industry experts sharing their insights on why your existing solutions are no longer enough to protect you from cyber threats that you'll face this year and in years to come. The moderator for this is that guy that was speaking in that strange language earlier, Paul Stringfellow. So Paul, back over to you. Take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Pat. Hopefully we're going to get the translation running across the bottom of the screen for this section. But most of our guests on the panel you'll be able to understand, even if you don't understand a word that I'm saying, and that's fine. Well, before we jump into the panel, let me just take a moment to introduce them. Have we got their pictures on screen? There they are. That's great. I'm not doing these in the order you can see them on screen. I'm doing them in the order that I've got on my notes here. So let's start with our first panelist, and that's Candid West. He's the Acronis Vice President for Cyber Protection Research, where he researches new threat trends and comprehensive protection methods. Previously, he's worked for more than 16 years as a tech lead for Symantec's Global Security Response Team, and he was also named by Cybersecurity Executive of the Year as the Cybersecurity Excellence Award. So that's our first panelist, and that's Candid West from Acronis. Our next panelist is Dave Sieberts. Dave is a leader, author, speaker, an awarded influencer in the technology industry. Dave's expertise is in advancing technology business principles and channel development and leadership, and has over 45 industry awards, including Microsoft MVP. He's recognized as a pioneer and in his leadership as CEO for 5 different channel organizations. Our third panelist is Randy George. Randy joined the Boston Red Sox in July 2002. Do I need to say Boston when I'm in the US? It's just an English thing. Where he was the first technology employee hired by Theo Epstein under the John Henry, Tom Werner ownership group. Randy's early career with the Red Fox focused on innovation and transformation of the technology stack within baseball operations. And our fourth panelist is Bobby Lalwani. Sorry, Bobby. Bobby's been in IT for the past 25 years between corporate IT and IT consulting, and he has a wide breadth of coverage from Linux, Mac, PC, and cloud computing with AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud Compute. So take a moment to welcome our panelists. Hi, guys.
Hey, Paul.
Hello, everybody.
At that point, you can all say hello, gentlemen, if you wish. Thank you very much. I thought I was here on my own. So let's why don't we jump straight into this? And maybe we'll start with the person I introduced last, Bobby. I talked before in the kind of the keynote presentation about some of the common mistakes I see in organizations. But what about you? What's some of the common mistakes that you see that leave businesses vulnerable to cybersecurity attacks?
Absolutely. So definitely being behind on patching is a big one, which you touched upon in your keynote there. Also, a lot of times with small and medium-sized businesses, you might only have one IT person, and sometimes that IT person might only be part-time as well. So being able to keep up with everything that's going on and in cybersecurity versus your other IT duties is a daunting task, and sometimes the cybersecurity piece can fall behind. Another thing is maybe alerts as well. We all have sometimes monitoring alerts, getting alert fatigue, not keeping up with that. That's another item that people fall upon. The other issue is just because you have endpoint protection software and backup software, is that enough? Are you keeping an eye on your console? Are you keeping track on alerts or what's happening within the endpoint security console or backup console? So some feedback there.
Yeah, so I think I think there's some great points there. And maybe if I can just bring in from vendor land, actually, Candid, if I can bring you in, what from your point of view, from an Acronis point of view, what are some of the common mistakes that you're seeing?
I would agree with kind of the basics which are often missing. So the unpatched system still is a common threat that we see, specifically now, of course, where we have a lot more exposed services. Right, could be a remote desktop protocol or now Exchange servers, which have a vulnerability. And if people don't patch it, that's kind of an easy step for the attackers. We also see the classical weak passwords, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is still a common password, believe it or not. So definitely that should change, adding multi-factor authentication. You talked about user behavior analytics. So things like this. And of course, also test your kind of playbook, right? If you have a disaster recovery plan and backup, are you sure you can actually restore it? How long does it take you to restore it? Or do you find out on Sunday morning at 2 a.m. that actually you're missing something, or it was just an error message and it never actually worked before? So things like that. And for that, I would say one common mistake is not to know what's going on in your network or with your data assets, kind of the lack of visibility. Being it in the cloud where a lot of services have moved there are log files available. You just need to ingest those, right? And the same, of course, at home. If you do back up to your USB disk that you have at the laptop, that's fine, better than nothing. But do you actually know kind of where that data is, right? Is it encrypted? Is it, well, compliant to privacy regulations and so on? So I think first get the fundament, do the basics, and then start chasing the big nation state APTs.
You know, I would add one more thing to what's been said, and that is adopting modern tools. I think a lot of IT professionals already have a tool in place for many years, and they're like, I have that covered already. But those tools are legacy, and those tools don't really address today's cyber attacks, today's cloud environment, today's remote workforce. So in essence, you could keep the same budget you already have, but realign it to today's modern tools and modern platforms and really make a huge difference, like I said, with that same budget.
Yeah. Hey, Paul, just to add on.
I think all of those are, yeah, please do.
No, I was going to say, I mean, Tanda brought up the point of, sort of being aware about exposed services. And I'll tell you, one of the things that we sort of do religiously, almost on a daily basis now here at the Red Sox, is just vulnerability scan our own environment, right? Because I mean, half the battle, and I can imagine for small companies, this being sort of a particular challenge, like you really sort of can't force rank the cyber issues that you need to sort of remediate unless you know about them. Right. So like finding a vulnerability scanning tool, like, we use Rapid7 here, we use Qualys. They're very easy to deploy and run against your environment, and just surfacing those issues, like time and time again, I'm telling, when I run a vulnerability scan against my environment, like the point was brought up about patch management. It's always like the number one thing on our list that we sort of need to remediate, and then, it's just like, exposed services, like, think about a router that you put out there in an external network that has telnet listening or SSH. Those are like really like simple best practice type things that, when you're in a rush to deploy a service, you kind of forget to kind of go back and turn off. But those are the things that can really sort of harm you. It makes your environment really sort of easy to attack. So, your patch manager is the big one. MFA, so I mean, I'm sure there's a ton of people on this call who are Office 365 customers. There's a lot of folks that just don't take the time to go back and just MFA enable their critical applications. Just doing that one thing alone can really stop like, a vicious attack from even starting. So it's little things like that I think, people can sort of, get ahead of to the degree that they sort of think about it.
Yeah, and well, I think from all of you, the kind of probably the key takeaway there is about, and something I touched on is this idea of make sure you do the basics right. Get that base level of security right. Everything from, good password hygiene, good patching, etc. And Randy, actually, if we can move on to the next question, please. Randy, I'd like to stay with you actually as probably the person on the panel who's tasked with cybersecurity and perhaps the highest profile of the organizations that we're talking about today. What are some of the new threats that you're seeing at the Red Sox? What are some of the things that you're seeing in terms of looking to attack your kind of corporate sites, corporate infrastructure?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting question. I mean, I'm sure I spent my morning, like a lot of you, just kind of reverse engineering the Hafnium 0-day threat that we've all learned about over the last day or so. It's hard enough to kind of protect yourself against, ransomware syndicates. It's sort of doubly worse when you have sort of state-sponsored, nation-state developed 0-day threats that are, attacking critical infrastructure. So I wake up every day. It's almost like, for me, reading the New York Times or the Journal, like, I look at, just vulnerability and threat assessment sites and, figure out what 0-day vulnerabilities I sort of need to attack that day. The sports industry is kind of unique, like we have threats and sort of concerns that, like the normal SMB wouldn't. So think about like a rogue drone, right? It's only a matter of time before, someone attaches sort of like an explosive payload to a drone, and drops it in a major sports venue. So we have drone detection platforms, we have social media monitoring platforms in place, to identify if someone jumps the fence or is running on the field at midnight. So we do have sort of like, industry unique cyber, concerns, that I'm tackling on a day-to-day basis, but above and beyond that, we're just seeing, just sort of like a massive increase in just like the regular like gift card scams, wire transfer hacks, direct deposit redirection scams, like our employees, just by way of them sort of being at home 100% of the time now, we're just seeing sort of just like a massive increase in those attacks, so that's really what we sort of spend our time, kind of battling back against.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to bring that, Candid, but being as your VP of research, so this probably should be right up your street. But some of the things that Randy talked about there, and actually I echoed some of that in the presentation earlier on. Some of those threats are around the fact that many of our users now have been moved out of their comfort zone, and some of those attacks like the gift cards and and wire transfer type scams are increasing in prevalence. Are they the kind of things that you're seeing as well, or are you seeing anything different to that?
Yeah, I would even go one step back and kind of put out there maybe unpopular techniques of the attackers didn't really change that much in the last few years. I mean, it's still the phishing attacks, it's still the exploits, it's still ransomware, right? But they apply it a little different. Of course, the theme, the lure around it, now it's COVID or something else, like relief money, get your parcel delivery, stuff like that. But on the other hand, the targets have changed. You mentioned a lot of companies, specifically SMBs, have moved to the cloud, right? So the attackers, they are already in the cloud. So we've seen an increase of attacks against cloud, for example, Amazon AWS 3 buckets, right? I have my own honeypot where I have 100 S3 buckets deliberately misconfigured. So you actually need to configure them badly, but unfortunately that still happens. And I see 6 attacks per day. And that's not just someone port scanning, that's someone actually downloading the files that I put on my fake S3 buckets. So those things happen. And we've seen ransomware attacks against Elasticsearch databases and other cloud containers. So I'd say they shifted kind of where they go because the targets moved there as well. That's one thing. And the other thing to highlight is, of course, was mentioned before as well, they kind of updated their attack tools in terms of automation. They can bring up the high frequency, the high volume, quite speedy, and they also know their targets. So they actually know which antivirus solution you use, if you do have a backup or not. They will try to disable it, to uninstall it. So they probably know your organization better than your IT department, at least sometimes, and they will take that to their advantage. And that's exactly why we have the targeted ransomware, where they do the double extortion by stealing your data and everything. I mean, just take in the pure number of 600,000 new malware samples which are discovered every day, according to AV Test in Germany. So more than 500,000 new malware samples every day. That's not done by hand, right? That's a lot of automation. So the question is your blue team, your defense, also using automation, or are you actually just getting swamped by all those attacks?
So interesting, and I think as you touched on there, Candid, that obviously people's infrastructure has evolved, and I suppose we shouldn't be surprised that the attack vectors are evolving alongside it. But maybe if I come to you, Dave, just for a moment, are you seeing anything different for the SMB environment, for example? A lot of our attendees today are small, mid-sized businesses. Are you seeing any different new attack vectors that they should be concerned about?
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing is realize the game has changed. And what I mean by that is that now it's no longer just an issue of encrypting your data and then, you paying up in order to decrypt your data. Now, a lot of times the bad actor, they're inside your network for statistically about 172 days before they're detected. What that means is they're taking that time to patiently learn your network, learn your vulnerabilities, learn exactly how to exploit and take advantage of what you have, because most businesses aren't looking to see if they've been compromised. Therefore, I hate to say it, but the bad actors have a lot of time to kind of troll around. And also they have, high-speed internet is mostly everywhere. That means the bad actors have faster speed to upload your data that they now have access to. So the name of the game is not to immediately show their hand so that you know they're there. It's to be covert and to stay in your network. And I mean, it hit the news not too long ago that a major corporation had 10 years of someone inside their network that they didn't know about it. So I mean, this is unfortunately really common. And then when the time is right, normally at midnight or on the weekend when you're not there, when the time is right, that's when they start the encryption, and that's when they got you, because that's when they want you to pay for the key, and they want you to pay not to post your IP data online. And the key is it could have been prevented because they've been in there for so long without you knowing it.
And I think that's a tremendous point, actually. One of the things that we see is this kind of increasing attack strategy is to be in a network for a long time, because even if we've then got advanced tools that are looking for unusual behavior, if you can make unusual behavior look normal behavior, that in itself is an attack vector, and it's an interesting problem to solve, and one we're not going to solve in the next 10 minutes, guys. I don't think, although by looks of Candid's face, he's already on with the idea. So yeah. I want to move on to the next question, if we can, please. Let me bring that to Bobby first. Yeah, so we've managed to get to question 3 without mentioning pandemic, but here it is. But Bobby, have you seen a cybersecurity threat, or maybe more importantly, the operational challenge that the SMBs are facing in dealing with cybersecurity? Have you seen that change a lot over the last 12 months or so?
Definitely. Obviously, the landscape has changed where now everyone's working from home. And so IT staff is now presented with having to support systems that are home systems. They may be older laptops or desktops. They may be a different brand. Your office might be Windows. At home, you're using Mac. Now you're having to support those systems as well and ensure, are those systems protected? Do they have proper antivirus? Do they have proper patching? So that, again, lends into more complexities in supporting and protecting your environment. And then again, you touched upon this earlier about the home Wi-Fi and home networking products. Is the Wi-Fi secure? Is your home gateway product, your firewall router, is that secure? Is it the default password that Comcast has out there? So those are the challenges that we're going to face with this pandemic.
So, and again, I think all those are, are great points, and we kind of touched on this earlier about that idea that people have been moved into this, out of their comfort zone and suddenly find themselves operating in a very different environment. And Candid, can I come to you again, from the kind of research position and vendor position? Is this something that you're seeing? Have you seen a change in some of the operational challenges that SMBs are seeing now?
Absolutely. I mean, we got lots of requests from SMBs because they are now facing this new challenge, or have been in the last year, right? And a lot of them were not really prepared for it, so they had to adapt. And as already mentioned, there's a lot of change you have to cover for some remote workers. Maybe you don't have enough laptops, right? And if you're a 10-people company, you might not be able to just get 10 new laptops for everyone. So there are some private laptops now which are used, and the question is, how can you control them, right? How can you make sure that they're compliant, that they're updated, that they're patched? So all those new, let's say, challenges we have definitely seen, and we also integrated a few of those features, for example, in the Acronis Cyber Protect, where we got a lot of requests saying, hey, can we have something like a protection plan for remote workers? So I don't have to do all the tweaking myself, but can just out of the box say, hey, this one is at home, please protect it adequately. And those things, of course, have happened. And the second one, it's the move to the cloud, right? We've seen lots of demand of new SaaS services back up to the cloud. And of course, that's great because you can dynamically add new services and kind of be more flexible. But a lot of them were lacking the knowledge. They're kind of reluctant to ask for help. But they actually should probably go to an MSP helping them, because in the end, yes, it will cost you a lot more to fix it down the line if you don't do it right from the start.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and we've touched on this before, but yeah, that idea of don't be afraid to invest in your cybersecurity because it's an awful lot less than the cost of not doing so. And Randy, I'd just like to come to you actually and just stick with this question for a moment. As somebody who's, I appreciate, not an SMB necessarily, but somebody who certainly has got operational challenges and operational challenges that would have changed a lot over the last 12 months or so. What are some of the things that you've seen?
Yeah, no, it was really interesting for us. I mean, we host, as you guys know, like, say 40,000 fans a game here when we're playing baseball. And our IT staff is like uber focused on executing like operational excellence for a baseball game, right? There's a ton of technology that goes into running the park. But when the pandemic came, our focus immediately switched from the fan to the employee, and helping them kind of acclimate to working from home, 100% of the time. And, we're like every other sort of company. We have like a very wide range of technical aptitude in our employee base. We have like the scout who's a little bit older. They hate technology and, just like introducing them, getting them focused for 2 minutes on showing them how to use Zoom or Teams or, anything else for that matter that can kind of help them get through this. That was a major challenge. And we had the other sort of extreme where, they've been using these tools forever. But it was all like, for us, it was just a drop everything moment, license Teams, train everyone how to use it, license Zoom, train everyone how to use Zoom, remote enable our call center, boost our sort of like remote access capabilities. So, where before we had 50 people connecting remotely, now we have 500 people connecting remotely. Engineering call center, solution so we can take calls from our customers from home. It was a challenge. I think the silver lining for us, it's probably the biggest COVID silver lining for us is that, our employees, I think forever now are going to be super productive from wherever they are, and we're probably like every other company where it's like, it's where before, we really sort of, overly relied on having people here in a shared office space to share ideas and collaborate and get work done. Now we've demonstrated that we can work anywhere remotely and be super productive in that world. So it's been, as tragic as it's been for our industry from an employee productivity standpoint, it's going to be sort of like, a lasting sort of benefit, a little bit. So strangely.
I would add that one more big challenge for SMB is there's no longer a perimeter. And that's a game changer. And normal IT, your IT staff is accustomed to maintaining a safe zone, a safe perimeter, firewalls for everyone to go through before they reach the internet. And now with people working remotely so vastly across the US, and let's face it, we rapidly move people home, meaning we didn't really plan this out. It wasn't something we all intended. And but now we realize that a lot of workers will stay remote. So, I think we need to revisit this new concept that there is no real perimeter, and if you address it, it will dramatically help your situation. Lastly, I was asked to answer a question. One of the other panelists brought up MFA, and so MFA. Someone said, "What is that?" So there's two terms you really got to know, and forget the terms. You have to go do it. It's your action item today. So MFA is multi-factor authentication, and 2FA simply means two-factor authentication. They're kind of interchangeable for our conversation. But in today's environment with no perimeter, so many people working from home and remote locations, the heavy influence of cloud now, you must, it's not a like or a want, it's a must. You must enable that for your workforce. That's how you're really going to tighten up your security overnight. And in 3 seconds, it allows you to, when you log into something, to send a code down to the owner's mobile phone, as an example, like when you log into your bank, and then you key in that 6-figure digit, and it really, really helps lock down the bad actors to secure your network. So that's your action item today.
So yeah, I think the other action item is that we need to get trending #MFA all of the things. So let's get that done. So for the guys who are doing the slides in the background, I'm going to fool you now big time, because I'm going to roll questions 4, 5, and 6 into one. So do what you like with the slides there. Just because I want to kind of cover these questions, and there's one more that I want to ask the panel before we run out of time here. So I'm going to amalgamate all these questions together, and actually, Dave, I think I'll stay with you. So there's a whole bunch of things that we've changed. We talked about cloud and the increased attack on cloud that we might see, and some of the security threats there. So what are some of the modern tools that we should be having in place to help protect us against some of these modern threats? And how, just as a supplement to that, how should we be looking to encourage a security culture inside of an organization? So if we can keep these answers brief though, chaps, because I do want to get on to the last question as well.
Quickly, it's, even though it's obvious, patching is vital, password changes are vital. Everybody knows it, but not everybody does it. And that's why we have so many hacks and so many cyber attacks and so much ransomware. The key thing that you can do is there's something called MDR. Look that up. You should implement it, manage, detect, response. The key is you will be hacked. It's not will I, you will be hacked. And you don't want to be one of those 172-day where the bad actors inside your network learning about everything you have. With MDR, you get notification quickly. Hey, something's not right. Hey, things are being modified. Hey, people are accessing from unusual places. That will allow you to quickly plug the hole, stop the incident, the breach, and never have the situation in the first place. That's something big that everybody can do to make a difference.
And Candid, actually, let me bring that same question to you. You know, what are you kind of, what are your thoughts in that space?
Maybe tackling from another angle, saying whatever you use, it should be automated, right? Because in the end, you don't have the time to do everything manual. So make sure that it's automated, and for that, it has to be simple. Nobody has time and the nerves to go over 20 different consoles. If you have that complexity, you will make mistakes, right? Because you don't have the big picture. You might not be able to configure everything in all the consoles the same. So try to reduce your complexity, increase your visibility, and automate where possible. I think that's it. And that should hopefully help you get done with the basics so you can then improve on top of that.
Yeah, and maybe just to you, Randy, as well, in terms of somebody who's deploying these things kind of inside of your organization, is there any kind of new tools that you've embraced? And have you done any work around kind of embracing this idea of cybersecurity culture?
Yeah. I mean, from a modern tooling perspective, like we're very sort of spoiled here in Major League Baseball because we have centralized cybersecurity program, whereby, we collectively bargain, with all 30 teams, the procurement and purchase of like an incredible array of cyber tools. So from a modern tooling point of view, my hunch is that, I'm using some tools that maybe some like super small companies aren't using, but that can cost effectively. I'm thinking about like a good SIM or log management tool, something like Splunk or Sumo Logic, or even like a Datadog, something where you can aggregate all of your logs and build dashboards and parse out relevant information from logs, to surface, cybersecurity related issues that you sort of need to know about, but it needs to be easy to consume. So a SIM is really sort of like at the heart, of any just robust cyber program. A good threat intel tool is worth its weight in gold. We've used tools like, Protectwise, Darktrace, like way back in the day, tools like Landcope and Mazu did a good job at like the behavioral analysis of things that are sort of happening in your environment that are anomalous. Nowadays, these tools use machine learning to, identify like, incredibly insightful and super hard to detect issues, without really sort of like a machine learning approach to surfacing those issues, you really sort of have no chance to identify problems. A robust CASB, Dave mentioned it, like everyone's working from home, right? So like, the whole like, zero trust push, to kind of like secure the edge and the app and a server, secure the actual service, instead of taking a perimeter approach. Is incredibly helpful. I mean, I just looked in my CASB tool today. I fingerprinted over 750 cloud apps in my environment that are in use by employees. I mean, that's incredible. So like, talk about like, how do we sort of like, how do we secure SaaS applications? Is that important? It's incredibly important. Like just as a small company like mine, we have 750 discrete cloud apps in use. So that's I mean, those three things, dark web scanning, identity management platform, my Office 365 offers one. We're a big Okta shop here in Major League Baseball, but making sure your employees are using a single sign-on solution that you can also layer MFA on top of, so you could have one source for authentication to all of your apps is critical.
And I think, Randy, actually, because you talked about a lot of kind of what we would see as advanced tooling traditionally there to solve some of those problems. But I think one of the things that we are seeing, we've talked about cloud numerous times during the event so far, is that cloud services. You touched on Microsoft 365 there. You know, Microsoft have made lots of these kind of complex tools really readily available, even to smaller organizations. And of course, yes, there is cost associated with that. So I think that's an interesting shift that we've seen. So so for the guys queuing up the questions, if we can jump to question number 7, because I kind of want to wrap up with this one now, and I want to kind of start with Bobby, and we'll see whether we've got time to grab something from somebody else here. But you know, one of the questions that I see get asked quite a lot is that if an organization has been attacked by ransomware, is there a point where they should pay? Bobby, what do you think?
Yeah, great question. Now, the real big question here is, how do you trust they will give you a de-encryption key as well? Now, I have a couple of quick stories. So a few years ago, I had a brethren that did get attacked by ransomware. They did attack and encrypt their hard drive. They didn't have backup. They were doing an Xcopy style backup. The price was $600. So they paid it. They went down, but what they had to do is they had to pay via Bitcoin. So they have to go down to the bank, take $600 in cash, convert it to Bitcoin, and then they sent it off. Another story I had very recently, we had another company, another brother in IT, that the entire infrastructure got hacked, ransomware, and the fee there was $600,000. They didn't pay. Now the backup data was burned, couldn't recover from a backup and whatnot. Their only saving grace was it was a NAS, so they had a way to get into the NAS through the back door and still get to the data. But right now, I've heard those servers are still shut down and they're moving to the cloud for other areas.
So so before we move on to kind of your final key takeaways for the audience today, anybody else want to throw something in on whether you should pay? Does anybody agree that you should always pay?
I would definitely not agree with always pay, but I agree that it is difficult, right? As in, it was already mentioned, kind of, can you trust them? Even if you do get the right key, it might take you actually 24 hours or even longer to decrypt it, because they don't really give you a nice deployment tool. At least most ransomware groups don't. So you might need to do some PowerShell scripting around it. And I mean, can you really afford to be down 48 hours, 2 weeks, right? I mean, sometimes even if you would pay, that takes a long time. And yes, for large organizations, the ransom might be 10 millions. We've seen higher, but getting 10 millions in Bitcoin, it's not so easy in 24 hours, believe me. I've seen companies try, and luckily in the end, they said, no, we actually going to rebuild from scratch.
That's the problem.
It's a business. I would go ahead.
Okay, sorry.
I would quickly add, I would quickly add that never divulge that you're paying the ransom. I understand that at times you do pay, but there are legal ramifications. Get a lawyer involved, because they can pay in your behalf. In other words, ultimately you'll still be paid, but you don't necessarily need to state that you paid it. And also on the keys, you can negotiate. You can negotiate a lot. And as an example, you can negotiate, I will give you a percentage of the money. You provide me a subset of keys so I can validate they work. And you can continue from there. And lastly, always air gap your backups. If you air gap them, even if someone's inside your network, they cannot access those backups in order to destroy them. So there's lots on the table that you can nenegotiate and do to change the cards in your favor.
So certainly talking about data protection strategies, that's a whole event that we haven't got time for. So yeah, if we can have the last slide up, please, guys. I wanted to make sure that all you got the opportunity to give, to just share with them some of your kind of key tips. You know, I think it's always great to come to events. It's always the thing that I look for, is to be able to come to an event like this and have something to take away with me. So I'm kind of going to go with the way this is, starting with Bobby, how this is laid out on the slide. So so Bobby, you know, I'm not asking you to read exactly what's on the slide. Everybody can do that for themselves. But you know, what's kind of a key takeaway that you'd like people to take from today's event?
Precisely this, and I think Ken had also brought it up earlier, and a few other panelists. Verify, test, audit what you have in place, because the day you have to use it, it better work. So
yeah, test, hashtag test. Dave, yourself?
You know, in addition to what I said, realize that hackers are not that smart. They simply, most exploits are published online so that coders can fix them.
bad actors simply download what's already published. So by detecting and responding when incidences do happen, you can quickly fix them before it grows to an issue of business concern and business cost.
Yeah, it's a great tip, Dave. And Randy, for you?
Yeah, no, Dave hit on the key theme here, relative to having like an air gap backup. I think for me, like, my wife always laughs when I tell this story, but I had legendary battles with groundhogs in my house. And groundhogs are like, they're the smartest creatures I've ever seen because they have 3 or 4 exits, right? All the time they have 3 or 4 exits, and it just occurred to me one day, like that's sort of like that approach to kind of surviving is kind of, sort of how I live in my world here, at the Red Sox relative to like engineering highly available systems, that can survive disaster, and if you think about like ransomware is a key theme of this TechCast here, you really sort of, you almost need a replica of your data, which I have a backup of my data on tape, and I have that air gap backup that Cyber Protect and Acronis backup provides me, just in the event that, ransomware just runs wild in my environment. I just have that 3rd and 4th level of sort of protection that I can reference to survive and recover quickly. And so for me, that's the key theme.
Yeah, and there's a whole bunch of gags in those groundhogs that we haven't got time for. And Candid, for you to kind of wrap up the final comment, please.
Yeah, maybe to top it off with the visibility theme, right? Know what's happening with your infrastructure, with your data, with your users. Because if you don't know what's happening, you cannot protect it, right? And that also means, of course, looking at those log files, ingesting it, right? Because we talked about many of those attackers, they're inside your network for a few months, even sometimes 10 years, right? So there are some traces on the network that you can actually see if you take the time to look at it. But most of the times, it's only just to kind of know who's actually accessing my cloud database, right? And those patterns, I mean, they're telling. So make sure that you know what's happening with your data, and then you can decide how best to protect them.
Well, everybody, thank you. I think, hopefully our audience has taken as much from your advice and your experiences as I have today, because I know it's certainly been something that's worthwhile for me. So I'm glad I'm here. And gents, thank you for your time. Really appreciate it and really appreciate your experience. So for now, I'm going to hand back to Pat.
Thank you very much, guys. Fantastic panel. And Randy, I just say 3 words for you. Watermelon, bubblicious bubblegum. They have a minute of joy and bliss and that taste in their mouth before they ultimately choke on and go away. But that's a little side tip for you, not tech related. Thank you for the panel, guys. A lot of great feedback. We've got a ton of questions. Obviously, we're not going to get to all of them in this 1 hour and a half that we've got together here today. But we will get them answered, and the team will continue to answer them live in the chat. We're going to kick over now to a demo. We're going to then get to the Q&A and then do a brief closing wrap up. So let me pass it over to Dan Cardinal, who will now do a quick demo of Acronis Cyber Protect 15.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to start with a few introductory slides and then a real-time view of the actual product, starting with what is cyber protection? Cyber protection is the midpoint of data protection and cybersecurity, the combination of which provides the maximum safety for one of the most valuable assets to any company, its data. Cyber protection essentially puts you in a prevention rather than cure posture, whereby endpoints are guarded in a way that minimizes the reliance of system backups to recover devices and sensitive data. And as we're about to see, the integration and automation provide unmatched protection, increase in productivity while decrease in total cost of ownership. There are numerous features relating to Cyber Protect, far too many to condense into one short illustration, so here are a selected few that tend to make a difference from the start when I work with users of the platform. In no particular order, efficiency. One single management location equals not having to jump between different consoles and policies to ensure protection. This is also true of the device being protected. Consolidation of cyber and data security means only one agent needs to be deployed and managed. As an added bonus, this way of working also translates into a very shallow learning curve due to the way the single console is designed. From an endpoint perspective, a combination of behavioral engine scanning and artificial intelligence combined with traditional signature-based scanning give maximum protection against zero-day threats as well as known malicious processes. One of the main ways malicious software finds its way onto a device is through unpatched software. Acronis works to find and patch those vulnerabilities. In terms of ongoing security, we'll look at how we can utilize features such as the threat feed and continuous data protection, which make us aware of potential threats and devices at risk, as well as providing the ability to protect important data on the fly. And finally, of course, backups. While there's a lot we can do to protect endpoints and illustrate risks, there's always the potential for hardware failure or loss of devices, data we can quickly recover based on the fast and efficient incremental backups we take. And also as a final kicker, we can potentially remote wipe any lost or stolen hardware. Before we move on to the visual part of the demo, I wanted to introduce some numbers. The top 5 stats of 2020 show 31% of companies reported at least one cyber attack, and more than 1,000 companies had their data leaked. Because of the nature of business worldwide and the prevalence of working from home, attacks on remote workers are on the rise. In addition to the increase in frequency, there's also an increase in complexity, which has to be continually combated. To paraphrase an old quote, eternal vigilance is the price of data security. Finally, here are some third-party tests provided by VirusTotal on detection times for samples of major ransomware families. These trends are indicative across all of the independent tests that were conducted, and you can explore the results yourself by heading to our website or speaking with your account manager. Moving on to the platform itself, I'll start with an introduction to security features, starting at the dashboard. Here we can see, as soon as you log in, stats relating to security. For example, how much malware has been blocked today and overall, likewise for URLs, and known vulnerabilities and patches that can be applied. As mentioned in the introduction, as part of the ongoing data protection, Acronis pushes information from our Cyber Protection Operations Center to individual deployments. The benefit being users know what threats are on the horizon and can prepare for them based on suggestions we make and actions that can be put in place. Next, we'll talk about plans. Plans are essentially packages that contain the details for how protection should be applied. A protection plan is so named because it contains all of the configurable options that relate to backup and cyber protection. I'll zoom in a little at this point to make it more visible and start with the backup info and work through the key features in turn. Here you can choose what type of backup should be performed and the corresponding frequency and retention rules. Because of the efficient way we back up using incrementals, you can take them more frequently and store them for longer, giving you better options for recovery in the event of a disaster. The feature I'd like to emphasize here is the continuous data protection. This allows you to nominate applications or files and folders which can be backed up on the fly, which means any change through AutoCAD in this example would be instantly and automatically backed up outside of the set scheduled backup runtime, ensuring minimal impact to business operations. Next, we have antivirus and anti-malware protection. As I mentioned, the primary functionality works by using a behavioral engine and artificial intelligence to spot any anomalies in the way applications run. The benefit being, we can help to protect against zero-day threats. For anyone not familiar with the term, a zero-day threat refers to a threat that is currently not widely known and consequently doesn't have a solution. For example, if I were to write some malicious code and email it to you, we'd be able to detect it based on the way it runs and the actions it performs. To build on that situation, where we do detect software that has the hallmarks of ransomware, such as files and folders being renamed and encrypted, we can take actions ranging from notifying admin users, stopping the process, and even reverting any changes made using system cache. Self-protection is used to ensure malicious processes can't tamper with the underlying security processes and circumvent the protection in place, which ensures maximum long-term protection. URL filtering allows categories of sites to be blocked, ensuring sites that could potentially be a conduit for malware such as hacking or illegal downloads can't be accessed in the first place. Remember, prevention is better than cure. As mentioned in my introduction, one of the main ways malware finds its way onto a device is through unpatched software. This option gives us the ability to scan devices and assess where known vulnerabilities exist and the subsequent steps of applying the appropriate patches. Patch management gives us the ability to automatically patch vulnerable devices or find the vulnerability and let you patch it manually. You can choose the level of updates you wish to apply and even make individual selections per application that you use on a case-by-case basis. There's also the option to take a pre-update backup as a precautionary step in the case of any issues or conflicts. Once the options are set, you'll be able to add the protection to any number of applicable devices. Just to add a little more context to the patch management, what we're looking at here are the patches that can be applied to my devices. You'll see the patch name and the affected product, as well as the number of machines that it applies to. The settings show information relating to how long we should keep the patch available to us, and crucially, if it should be automatically approved. For any patches that aren't automatically approved, you have the ability to select them from the list and go through the steps manually according to any change control process in place. The final point I'd like to make here relates to the devices and the options specific to them. In addition to being able to remotely connect to them using RDP, or even remotely wiping a device's data, we can, of course, recover data. And during that process, we can enable a safe recovery, which scans the data being recovered for any potential malware, ensuring that we're not reintroducing problems after any disasters we've already dealt with. Hopefully that's been insightful in some way. So with that, I'll hand back to the moderators.
Excellent. Thank you. I actually thought that might have been Paul doing the demo as opposed to Dan. The accent sounded quite familiar. Appreciate that quick demo there. At this point, we're going to take some questions from our Q&A chat. I'll pass it over to Paul to kind of moderate this section. I know we got probably got 40 plus questions here, so we're not going to be able to get into them. We'll get probably 3 or 4 of them answered here, and then we'll answer the rest of them in a follow-up. So over to you, Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Pat. And yeah, here I am again. So for anybody who's not seen enough of me, here's one more time. So we've got a bunch of questions to get through. We're going to try and hit these up real quick. So I'm looking down at my phone because that's how they've all been sent to me, which seems like a plan. So there's a question here about good strategy to secure cloud infrastructure, but it's also got another part to it as well that I think we can pull together in one question, which is about attaching our devices into things like Azure AD, Office 365, or Azure AD for the US audience, and 365. So, Dave, I think that was something that you wanted to pick up.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing to realize is that AD, Active Directory, has been around for, many years. So already most of the IT departments, your IT staff, have connected most of your machines, especially in the office, to AD. It's the way that it works and how we handle access and security. So Azure AD, of course, is how you access cloud resources. So you really cannot access cloud resources without using it. And you may not realize it, but there's something called AD Sync. And AD Sync ties the two together. Again, something your local IT staff probably did already. So it's not really an issue of joining your devices. Odds are your devices are already joined. But that ties them together so you can smoothly, securely, seamlessly connect your devices to either local resources or cloud resources. And lastly, realize because it's such a vast Azure hosted environment, it's robust, it's secure. A lot of money went into making it secure. So the answer is yes. It's a good thing to do.
Okay, that was it. That was a way of answering it. Yes is the correct answer. So I think it's a question that I'd probably like to throw out to Randy, actually, because it was something he kind of touched on during the panel session. And the question is here, how are backups protected from spoilage by advanced persistent malware?
Backups protected from spoilage. That is that's a good. I'm not sure what's the term spoilage is referring to exactly. You know,
how do we avoid our backups from being broken by something like a malware threat, perhaps?
Yeah, well, I mean, having air gap copies of the backups, you know, and you know, which effectively puts that data on a subnet and a network that's completely inaccessible for malware. You know, so that's, you know, that's sort of the value, at least, you know, in my environment, you know, having backups on tape, you know, which aren't really sort of vulnerable. They're not directly on the IP network. You know, they're sort of self-sustaining. You know, having a spinning disk replica of the data, which would be accessible by malware. You know, and then that sort of like totally offsite cloud-enabled, you know, air gap backup, you know, that Acronis Cyber Protect provides.
Yeah, and I think for those who want to go and look it up, go and look up data protection, the 3-2-1 model, to look at ways of ensuring that you kind of achieve that kind of stuff. So one of the other questions that came up, and anybody who wants to take this, although I think Candid might be keen to take this. Obviously, there's been a lot of conversation around SolarWinds and the impact of their security incidents, let's call it. Did you think that's what do you think the wider impact on the industry has been? And maybe throw that to you, Candid, first.
Sure. So yeah, SolarWinds with the Orion breach, I mean, it was a classical supply chain attack. So for those who have been living under a rock, it's basically when the attackers go after a vendor of a software company and then implant the backdoor inside that software, and then it gets rolled out through the official patches or updates from the official vendor side. And in the case of SolarWinds, it was digitally signed with the official signature. So very hard to actually distinguish, right? Because you're expecting a software update to come down and everything. And that's what makes it very successful. But it's by no means kind of the first time we've seen something like this. I mean, Asus, the Taiwanese manufacturer, has been broken into, NetSarang, CCleaner, or MEDocs with the NotPetya wiper. So there have been dozens and dozens of those attacks because they work, right? They're very good in getting into large companies. And that's what we saw with the SolarWinds, right? They managed to breach Microsoft, for example. They managed to breach a lot of US agencies, but of course also a lot of Fortune 500 companies around the world, where you say, hey, if they cannot protect themselves, how should I protect myself? But that's kind of the wrong way to go for it. It's, you need to check everything that comes and then going for the behavior again. Because yes, you might install it, but afterwards what it's doing in your network, you can still find those traces. But back to your original question, it kind of, did it change something? Well, it kind of made everyone hopefully realize that there is not 100% security, right? You need those 3 hedgehogs out, right? You need multiple exit strategies. And unfortunately, it gets more and more complex, but there are ways around it. There are ways to detect it. So I don't think it's something where we can now say, hey, we lost the game, or there will never be anything secured. No, don't give up, but make your homework.
Yeah, just remember that exploit was in place for 241 days. So that's why it's so important to proactively monitor for it.
So I just want to wrap up with this question, because I think it's a really good one. Yeah, we talked a couple of times, and I know I certainly like to do this when I come to an event, have something tangible to take away with me. And one of the questions that we had came in is there a good basic resource for SMBs that lays out specific recommendations as well as a checklist that the average SMB can implement without a budget? And I know in the UK that we have something from the Government Cybersecurity Centre, which is kind of a baseline 10 things that you should be doing. So I don't know if anyone of you guys want to pick that up with some top places that you go for kind of baseline cybersecurity tips that our audience could pick up on.
Well, there's always the NIST cybersecurity framework. There is a special edition for SMB. It might be a bit heavy on the regulatory or, let's say, guidance, so don't be afraid of that. But there are some useful tips, and as you said, there are some condensed checklists which get you at least started on the right track.
Yeah.
And for a final word, anybody else got some resources we could pinch?
Yeah, I think the SANS 20, I mean, any Google search of the SANS 20 too, Paul, is kind of like a predecessor of the NIST cybersecurity framework. But they, those standards, they're written in sort of like plain English. They do a good job laying out, some of like the processes and tooling, that sort of, goes into like, it is the foundation of any sort of, robust cyber program. So I found those personally very helpful in sort of getting going here.
Well, that's great. I appreciate that. And gents, we needed much longer to answer. A great interaction from our audience today. Really appreciate all the questions. And sorry we couldn't deal with them all here, but I believe the Acronis team are going to look to come back to you where they can and answer as many questions they can after the event. So, gentlemen, I'd just like to say thank you for one last time. Thanks for being part of the panel and taking some of those Q&As. Really appreciate your time. That's it from me, and I'd like to hand you back to Pat.
Thanks so much, Paul. Thanks to all of our panelists. Fantastic job, really interactive. I learned a lot as well. Hopefully our attendees did. We're going to pop up another quick poll here. I know we're coming down the stretch, a couple more things to share with you, but ultimately we ask that you share your feedback here. How would you like to be contacted by us? Additional contact information on Cyber Protect, phone conversation, arrange a demo, additional details, etc. So if you do want to be contacted, feel free to fill out that poll and we'll be in touch with you very shortly. And as Paul had mentioned, we will also follow up on all the questions to get all those answered for you. So thank you very much for your feedback there. All right, if we move forward, thanks again to the panel. We wanted to introduce you to a few additional resources. I know one of the last points the panel made was talking about additional resources for SMBs. We have our own resource center where we can share some case studies, some independent testing results, etc. Reports, white papers available for you, all for free in the resource center. Consider grabbing a copy of the Acronis Cyber Readiness Report. It compiles and analyzes the results of surveys of thousands of your peers and business and IT professionals in leadership and SMBs around the world, revealing their technology challenges, concerns, and plans that emerged from the pandemic specifically. So a lot of good, useful information there. And then one last point I want to make is we do try to leave the world in a better place. We believe here at Acronis, and it's part of our DNA, that knowledge should be available to all. It's a big reason why we do a lot of these virtual events to try to educate, not just our customers, but people in general out there as to the threats that are there. So if you have the opportunity, please donate to the Cyber Foundation. If you joined early, you saw a lot of fantastic videos of the work we've done in some less fortunate countries. $1, $20, $50 goes a very long way in some of these places in terms of building new schools and developing computer classes to hopefully educate the next generation. So if you have the opportunity, scan the QR code, make a donation. I know the kids will really appreciate it. So thank you very much. That's all the time we have for today. Really appreciate your attention. Some great questions. Thanks again to our panelists. Really a lot of great interaction there. So we really appreciate you joining. We look forward to seeing you again in the next virtual conference. Thanks so much, and make sure you download a trial of Acronis Cyber Protect today.
No tenemos una seguridad. La escuela vieja está deteriorada, las tablas están podridas, las paredes totalmente destruidas.
Acronis Cyber Foundation ले चाहिँ नि हाम्रो भवन बनाएर हामीलाई हस्तान्तरण गरेर त्यसको
Realmente esta nueva escuela es una bendición para los niños y para la comunidad.
Y es un futuro para mí. Me gusta mi nueva escuela porque tiene mucho espacio, la van a pintar, es grande.
हामीलाई धेरै खुसी लागेको छ पढ्नलाई पनि धेरै खुसी लागेको छ
Agradecerles mucho y más que agradecerles.
Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias.
Thank you to everybody who's come on board to support girls' education in South Africa.
Thank you.
Gracias a Acronis y donantes.
Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you for Malam Shaba. Thank you for support my school.
Pues nos sentimos, mire, agradecidos con Dios, con este organismo